first. Order with pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We don't have meeting agendas, do we?
Do you have any, did you make any agendas?
I did. Oh, everybody got one, but you guys did. Sorry.
Thank you. Good.
Did you do one?
Okay, we don't have any minutes to approve.
No, I'll check on them with the staff, and I guess you can double up next month.
Next thing is we're gonna end up changing our meeting to the first Wednesday of every month. So it changes some conflicts with some things. So anybody have any questions? Kathy, you have any questions on changing? Ben, you all right with that?
And just, I put a motion on there just for the heck of it, and just for everybody's information, just so there wouldn't be any confusion. I held off on it. It'll be in the paper this Sunday, because I didn't want it to go before this meeting, and there'll be confusion about April. Because they're also changing, just in case anybody's interested, because of the PSATS conference, the Board of Supervisors meeting this month will be on the 29th instead of on the 22nd.
You wanna make a motion?
I'll second it.
Any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Old business? Bassett subdivision?
Yeah, so I running a subdivision is to go and subdivide off 10 acres, or approximately 10 acres from a larger residual tract. And I am going to recommend going and tabling this for the month until next month, but I got a review letter. There were some like minor comments on the plan itself. But then also there's currently, we just need to figure out like sewage planning for this. There's currently a non-building waiver on it, but they went and they indicated they actually do want to go and build on that. So just to go and simplify everything, we're going to take off that non-building waiver, and they just need to go and coordinate with Washington County Sewage Council. So just to make sure that they have enough time to do all that and all get sorted out. I recommend tabling it for a month, but our other comments were very minor regarding other aspects of the subdivision. It was more so just, hey, can you go make this a little bit clearer, put an extra number, an extra instrument number on it.
Mr. Bassett, you all right with that?
Yeah,
There's another copy if you want to see it also.
That's
You
good.
showed it to me.
Okay. Do we have to make a motion on that to table that?
Yes, you could.
I'll make a motion to table that. You got a second?
I'll second.
You have a question?
Is this what's left?
Yeah, right here. They're gonna
Oh,
subdivide
this is
this.
what's left.
No, this is what you're subdividing from this.
That's it, right
Right,
here, right
yeah,
here.
this is what's
And
left.
this is what's left.
Mhm.
So, is this accessible like for all this?
Yeah, here's the farm. This is where the barns are in the house.
Okay. And this is space here too?
Mhm.
Okay.
Any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. I made a mistake, I forgot to ask for some public comment first. Anybody have any public comment? Dave, Cindy?
On anything? Any
On the
subject
agenda?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, my ideas haven't changed. I think setbacks need to be increased. You're saying you want it in residential high density and low density. And our experience, and I don't know if anyone in here has had that experience from Peters, it gets to be a real problem. And you're not taking anything away from anyone who's already farming. They're still allowed to do whatever they need to do to have animal, livestock, and everything up against houses. But when you designate certain areas for residential, high density or low density, and those people move in there, build houses, and then someone decides that they're gonna take land that wasn't in agriculture, put it in agriculture, you can, and you're putting no restrictions on the size of the buildings that you're allowing to put on there, you could get a higher density animal operation in there, and you're gonna have problems, just like this man is having with flies, odors, you name it. So I think it's a mistake to have zoning districts for residential and allow people who haven't been farming it to put agriculture buildings. It conflicts with residential. And
Well, we do have in some of our ordinances about how many animals you can have per acre and stuff like that.
But not really cows or not cattle or chickens. As far as I can tell, there's no restrictions on those numbers. And the way the ordinance is now, anyone that's in the residential area that has had animals, has been farming with animals, has them in buildings, they're allowed to still continue to do that. They can even sell their farm and operation to an outsider that could continue that use. If they pass away, their children could still continue that operation. It's only when you have a piece of property that is zoned agriculture that no one's had animals on, and then they want to come in and do it, then what they have to do is look at the ordinance that you have in place now that says you can't put these buildings up in residential areas. And it's so that you're trying to minimize the conflict between the area that you've designated where you want residential and a potential conflict in agriculture. There's still a lot of agriculture that you can do that's not a conflict. So you're not taking anybody's rights away.
the way it stands now, if you're already farming it, you're there first. The house is on it.
Let me clarify something. Farming is a permitted use in right now, so it's not grandfathered. It's not true that you cannot come and start a new farm operation in any zone in which you're allowed to have agriculture, which
It
is
should be.
A, RL, RH, MU, and B1. So, and if I might suggest, and I know I guess we're under general comment. Normally, at your discretion, we can kind of have an open discussion during the agenda items if you wish. And we could have flipped them anyway. We could start. We might, if you wish to just continue and actually
We'll just continue
just
that
go
right.
right to item C and just continue. The
Yeah, we'll just
discussion.
go right into that. That way, I knew that they would want to say
Sure,
something.
sure. Yeah, not trying to limit you. Just we might as well skip or might just kind of
Because I mean,
start talking.
they can't let you talk too long on that. So.
No. You can.
I don't want everyone to look back. We get to where the township is, putting more houses in those areas. And I applaud everyone for the planning that has been done so far. I'm all for making our township agriculture friendly. But there are little areas that are designated for residential. And you're gonna get into problems if you don't have further setbacks or something to, you know what I mean?
To the solicitor's point, I understand that your agriculture is permitted, but like in the parcel that affects us, where the owner wanted to build a building, so, because the buildings that are there don't meet the setbacks for animals. He couldn't utilize the buildings that were there for animals. He wants to build a new one. He wasn't allowed because of the way this is written.
But right now, if I bought a 40-acre tract
Yeah.
in the RH zone, which does allow agriculture and always allowed agriculture and never intended to subordinate agriculture to residential use, we have an idiosyncrasy in our ordinance right now where you can have a farm, but you can't have a barn. And just for everybody's information, just by way of the history on this, and the zone that we're talking about in particular, that's the RL zone, that used to be the A zone, A1 zone, ag zone. And then it was switched, kind of, they double clutched and went to like R2 zone, and that was kind of to accommodate the Cherry Valley estates. And then at some point in time, they kind of calibrated back and made it back to L, thank you, light. So, and that was kind of like an R1 in a different type of community. They use, A1, R1, R2. Always allowed, and both of those zones actually allow and always did allow as a permitted use even more intense agriculture, including agribusiness. So both of those always had allowed agriculture and always allowed agribusiness. What happened was when we did the last zoning update in 2018, and they introduced, and we had a consultant company with us, and shame on all of us, because I believe it was inadvertent. They introduced an accessory use chart to that, and a definition of agricultural structures. A farm structure, non-traditional scale, farm structures, traditional scale. And they introduced that definition, and they put that use only on the accessory use chart. And then in addition to that, the only place that they allow you, if you read it literally, to have a barn, for want of a better word, is in the A1 zone. So that although you're allowed to farm in the A1 zone, the RL zone, the RH zone, and the other zones, I believe that, and I don't believe there was any discussion, overt, purposeful discussion or intent to say, yes, we believe that we should have an ordinance where you can farm, but you can't have a barn. I believe that it was an inadvertent failure to check a box. And actually, and it's interesting because there's also a kind of a more of a legal argument and a definitional or a functional argument of what is a principal use and what is an accessory use. For example, if you have a property and you're allowed to have a warehouse, the building that's the warehouse, that's not accessory, that's the use of that property. In agriculture, and again, the zoning board, there was a case that interpreted this, and they held on its face, your ordinance, the way it's written, whether it was intentional or not, that's what it says right now. So they, I believe, were constrained to find that that as the ordinance stands right now, we do allow you to farm in URL in the districts where you're allowed to farm, but you're only allowed to have a barn in the A district. And I think they even noted that's a legislative matter. And this is what that would address. Let me just finish my thoughts.
As long as I have my time.
I told you, sir, and you will, you can speak at length. We're happy to hear any and all comments that you and anybody else has. And by the way, in addition, once you guys make any recommendations that you make, obviously we'll send this down to the county, and then because they do a review, and there'll be a public hearing before there would be any changes made to the ordinance. There's an argument to be had that on a farm, a barn is not an accessory use. An accessory use is a use that is subordinate to and customarily, subordinate to, but incidental to a primary use. For example, if you have a house, a swimming pool, a shed, swing sets, those are considered residential accessory uses. Or even if you have a business, you might have a primary building, but you may have outbuildings that would be accessory buildings on that. Family farms often have a house on them, obviously, because people live on their farms. There are also farms that may have farmland that just is farmland that's used to do farming activity, but doesn't have somebody living on that parcel. And in an agricultural use, it's arguable that a barn is not an accessory use when it's in a farm operation. It's a principal use building. And in fact, there's a treatise that folks look at in zoning. It's called Ryan on Zoning. And he's like the E.F. Hutton of zoning law, even the courts cite Ryan's on Zoning and stuff. And actually, I was reading that treatise recently, and they actually cited a case from the Commonwealth Court from 2021 in a similar vein, where the court actually observed a barn is not an accessory use in an agriculture. It's not an accessory agricultural use on a farm. A barn is not customarily incidental to a farmhouse. Arguably, the reverse is the case, because in fact, you wouldn't be living in a house if you weren't farming in the barn. So there's actually an argument that a barn in conjunction with the use of a farm is a principal use, not an accessory use. I've looked at a couple other ordinances, and actually up the road in North Fayette Township, which, even though they've kind of evolved into some residential development involving, closer to the city than you guys are, they actually use the same definitions, or similar definitions, and they actually, in their ordinances, and it's fairly common and it's consistent with that case I was just telling you about. In those communities, they define, I have one here. They actually have a definition of an accessory agricultural building, which is an accessory structure customarily incidental to an agricultural use or principal building, livestock, barns, stables, grain silos, and tool sheds. They also have a definition of a barn, and they allow barns as a principal use and as an accessory use, and they allow accessory agricultural buildings as an accessory use wherever they allow farming, including in the R1, R2, M1, B2, and industrial light zones where they allow farming. So that's kind of the context of the discussion. Now, if you had, that doesn't mean that anywhere you had, that anywhere in the R zone you can put, for example, a barn, because if you don't have a farm operation, then a barn wouldn't be accessory to that, or it wouldn't be a principal use to that. So that doesn't mean on a residential property that's being used as a residence, you could put a barn on it. You still would have to have the underlying farming use in order to put a barn on it as a primary structure or as an accessory structure. It would be our recommendation that you consider, because I do believe it was an error. It was an error, and it's not consistent with the agricultural use, that you consider allowing barns as a principal use and as an accessory use in the zones where you allow that. Now, same in a valid topic in all those instances, other considerations you could look at is whether you wish to look at the setback requirements for those structures. And again, we do in our current ordinance distinguish between farm buildings that house animals and those that don't house animals. Ones that house animals have an enhanced setback. Whether you're satisfied with what that number is right now, or whether you wish that to be tweaked, that would be something that you could look at as well. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you wish to comment yourselves, or take further comment from.
I would like to point out, any one of us in this room, if we came to our township, if we were outside of our township, came to our township, there's a field where it's right up against where you want to build your house. You build your house, no one's farming that field. And then once your house is there, then someone decides that they're going to put an animal operation in there. And they're going to put a barn within the setbacks that we have right now.
Which is 300 feet.
Right, 300 feet from the
From the
dwelling,
dwelling, right.
yeah, from any dwelling. I would be a little bit upset if I put all my life savings into my house and then someone puts, an animal operation upwind of me, that close to me. Now, that said, that's not the way it is in the ag zones. If you don't have that problem when you're already farming and you're in an ag zone, but you're telling people they can build their house in these residential zones, and then you're going to allow the same setbacks that we have right now. I think that's a mistake. You need to make those setbacks. I don't like putting restrictions on agriculture either. But just like the issue that we had, there's things that's going to cause problems down the road. And for you not to at least increase the setback, I think it's a mistake.
Well, that's something that can maybe be brought up at the public hearing, and discussed, if the people, if they feel that it should be longer or whatever, then that can be changed. That can possibly be changed. But, I mean, now when you put your wedding chapel in, your wedding barn, there wasn't a lot of people who weren't happy with you putting that in down there either.
We didn't put it in, it was there. That barn was
No, the
already
barn was there, but I mean, when you wanted to go the ag business, you put in, people were complaining about all the traffic would be there on them roads.
Didn't hear one. Didn't hear one. I
No
was
one,
in all
no
the
one
meetings.
came to any
There
of
was
the
not
meeting. There was
one
not one
complaint.
Well, that's,
complaint.
but there was
Not
talk.
one, Bill.
Not one.
Okay.
There was not one complaint, and the neighbors, even the people that were right there, no one complained about it. And it was a normal extension of the business we were doing. We were already having church groups there. From the time that we bought that property, we were doing pick your own pumpkins. The public was coming in with the blessing of the zoning officer.
Well, that's
here.
what I'm saying. They let things go to help you a little bit. And somebody has, wants to put a barn up. All we want to do is, if you have property, you need a barn.
And in fairness to the Simmons.
It was within
And
the
it-
zoning
yeah,
ordinance
it's
at
just-
the time.
Yeah, just for history's sake too, and in all fairness to Simmons, you kind of got non-conforming use for a while when they overshot and kind of turned that property into R2, because that farm at one time was an A1.
It was. When we
And then
bought
it went to an R2, so you had full rights, you could keep farming. Actually, you could dairy farm it right now and
I'm all
continue.
for that.
No, I get it. And then they scaled it back to the RL. And they were non-conforming for a while, and our ordinance at the time, when they got the zoning approval, that was by a variance because we didn't allow that at the lot.
It was not a variance.
No, it wasn't a
It was not a
variance.
variance.
Or,
You're a legal non-conforming use.
Because
okay, I'm sorry, they
always
recognized,
doing it.
yeah, and then
We were always
subsequently, we
doing it.
have, the update we did in 2018, we did things
Allow
where
that,
they'd
right.
allow in the A zone and in the RL zone, the kind of venues that they have here right now. But, and the only comment I'll make on the, for example, if somebody goes and buys a property in an R zone, and again, an R zone in this community is not an exclusive residential zone. It's a zone that allows residential uses, but it also continues, because this is a rural community, to allow farm uses. They're not grandfathered in R2. So if somebody goes and buys a property in the R2 zone, they do buy that property, and even if they build their house on that property, and if they have a 40-acre patch or something next to them, they buy their house and build their house on that property, aware that somebody can, on that property next to them, in that zone, under the current zoning ordinance, farm on that property. Because right now, actually, they could fill that you could put chickens or cows
Absolutely.
outside, but not
I don't want a
inside.
high-density animal operation like they were proposing to do that close to me, and neither would anyone in this room. I also think that you should maybe make it part of the ordinance that whoever wants to do that, say you have, like you say, 40 acres, they have to live there too, because then they have to put up with the stink too, and the flies.
We don't, and again, that's a choice, that's a legislative choice. Again, we don't require in agricultural zones or in general farm operations, wherever they are, and as you know, in family farming settings, and I know my folks, and they're up the road in another county, but it's fairly common setup where you might have a primary farm here. Maybe your grandfather bought a place across the street, and you're farming here, there, here on parcels that may be around. Not all the parcels of a family farm have a house on them. Even in the A zone,
But you
right?
made it a requirement that if you do what's it called?
Agribusiness.
Agribusiness, that you have to live there. Part of the family has to live there.
Okay. And again,
That's in your ordinance.
And I would like to just make a comment about when you were saying in the residential district, and it's not just exclusively residential, it allows for agriculture, and it does. But if you look at the mission statement of the residential district, it certainly would make someone believe that that was the priority. That's what we want to have happen there. And we are encouraging activities that support residential. And so what you were saying is really a conflict of the mission statement for the residential
Well,
area.
if you look at the couple of parcels that they sold down on Waterdam Road, the people built houses and also put barns up for
Yeah.
their horses and stuff like that. So they're not just putting a lot of houses up. They're just, they're putting barns up.
It could be all
All-
kinds,
all-
exactly.
all I'm
right.
So if somebody would buy that 10 acres and want to do that, why, they should be able to do that.
And actually, in the R zones
So
and those
all
mission
we're saying is a
statements.
barn. We just want to structure it. I mean, it's,
And actually, the legislative finding, if I might address a comment on the mission statement, if I might, I'm just to address her comment on the mission statement, there's not a priority in that zone that trumps one over the other. When you go to the permitted uses, and in Mount Pleasant, the legislative finding was and is, and it's not unique to Mount Pleasant Township, that in a rural community, having a housing plan in an R zone is not incompatible with continued agricultural uses surrounding it.
okay.
So that's all.
Okay, Kathy, do you have anything to say?
My turn.
Go ahead, say. So you have something to say? Ben, do you have anything?
Go ahead.
Wayne, go ahead.
That guy's not done.
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
No, that fellow there is not finished yet.
Go ahead,
I was
Troy.
gonna say something.
yeah.
No, please.
Well, go ahead. I mean, we can't keep talking. We got.
No, I know, I understand.
I mean,
And I'm
we
not-
know
I'm
your
not-
point. You don't want a lot of chickens down by your house.
I don't
Or
want
pigs,
high
high
density.
density.
Okay,
That's
well,
what I was
yeah,
gonna
I'm
say.
just- we're just saying the chickens
Add
are
into, in a residential zone, add in there, no high density animal operations.
Okay.
Or increase the setbacks, or you're proposing to allow any size barn regardless of the size of the acreage. So, if you're not gonna limit the size of the barn, if you're gonna allow the large scale barns for animals, that would just be so many animals. You've restricted horses, but you're not gonna restrict pigs and chickens and everything else. where people-
Well, that's it. That'd be something I think when we have the hearing on it,
We can
we
talk
can mention it and then go from there. We're just an advisory board. It's all we are. So, Wayne.
And if you have suggestions, and again, please don't take any kind of responses as a cutoff or anything. I would hope that it can be conversational and back and forth. So if I make any comments in response to yours, please respond back. I'm not trying to inhibit that. And for example, if you have suggestions on
Setbacks.
what an appropriate setback you think might be, like even on the enhanced,
Yeah.
setback rule.
But see, the thing is, you got to take the piece of property into account too. If it's a long, narrow piece of property, you can't say 300 feet or 500 feet.
And the other thing
You
is
could
too.
have houses
You
all
could say
around
center,
it.
center.
And
You could say in the center of the property.
Well, that's what I said. It's
It's,
sometimes you got to take each piece of property into consideration.
yeah.
And I didn't know if you may have commented at an earlier meeting. I missed one meeting where my associate was here, for example, we do have a definition of like big barn, little barn. Okay.
Right.
And maybe I didn't know if you had suggested perhaps there could be distinguished, made
size.
between those two.
Yes.
And if one was to look at those, it occurs to me, because if you look at, I'm not sure where the 25,000 square feet number came from, but if you go over under on 25,000 square feet, you're already a substantial size of a building, because, 25, if you do the square root of 25,000 square feet, it's about 150 by 150 if it was a square building. That's a pretty,
That's pretty big.
the milk house of my family's, that's a pretty good sized milk house.
I don't know if you know that they put a chicken laying place off of
Down the main
980. Are you familiar with
Yes.
I suggested.
Well, that was
too.
the owner of the property that owns the property right across from us, Don
And I
Foods.
suggested that to them.
But they put it in the center of a large acre farm. It's not up against any other, it's
No,
not.
it-
close
That's
to-
where the
put
old
any
barns
building
were.
up. They
It's
put
It's
it
where the
barn.
barns were, and it's in the center, and we had suggested that to him in the beginning.
Before he did anything.
All right, okay.
Just to
Wayne,
mitigate.
do you have anything to say?
Okay, yeah.
I'll give you 5 minutes, Wayne. I know what you're going to say, but I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay, so my brother-in-law went to Harrisburg. He sold 3 acres. And anybody that's city person, they think, man, we got 3 acres, we can do anything we want. But in the rules, You gotta have 10 acres in a B1 area, be called a farm or hobby farm. He's got 3 acres, it's 86 feet from my bedroom window. He got them cows, has 6 cows right there. And he took truckloads of cow shit out of that place. Manure. I'm supposed to forget.
That's what I would understand.
But it's been 10 years, and I'm west of him. I get all the cow manure smell. Flies, you wouldn't believe. You leave your truck out in the driveway with the windows down, you're done, especially when it's warm.
How often does he clean that out?
If I could suggest, this time is the topic of the proposed barn amendments, not general discussion.
Well, that'd be right.
Well,
That's
what
what
did he do?
He's trying to point out that there's problems when they're too close.
Yeah,
I get it, but again, not gonna
Yeah,
get into the
we
facts
kinda
of
know
that
we
case.
know Wayne has a problem, and
yeah, nobody's doing nothing about it.
Wayne,
that
we
property's
have
not-
no control, we're just,
I know, I realize you guys.
okay, so we're here talking about the ordinances we're gonna try to change. For right now, it's on the agenda.
I'm gonna be on the agenda
Okay.
next month,
Okay,
or well, the 25th.
okay. Tom, do you have anything to say?
No, sir.
Ben, you have anything?
Good.
All right. I'd like to make a motion that we kind of press forward with this and get a township meeting.
What
Or
would,
hearing?
it would be, well, I guess the board should kind of, if we were gonna move to a public hearing, we would wanna have some kind of a proposal as to what it would be. And would the recommendation be that you add the accessory uses
Yes.
to the other zone, or that, and I would suggest this, that you actually make it an accessory use and a principal use in the zones where you allow farm.
I'd like to make a motion to make an accessory and a principal use in the RL district, in all the districts.
Okay. All those districts where agriculture is allowed.
I'll second.
Dairy farm didn't
Here we go.
Any questions?
go.
The only thing stipulation would be if maybe look into possibly changing some setbacks and maybe find out, and if they have a hearing,
Right.
how that,
And if you want, we can, I beg your pardon, I'm
Would
sorry.
that be part of the motion?
Yeah, and
well, that's why I said,
Let me say this.
in
There's no-
talking about that and seeing,
there's
because,
no urgency to this change. It just came up. Obviously they were aware of the case, and it's not because the case just was the catalyst for why the topic kind of hit their plate. There is no urgency to change it, yesterday. If you wish, we can continue discussion on this. If you want, if folks want to come back to you guys next month and say, okay, we hear you on that. If you can make the recommendation that you do that, still table it for further discussion on potential setbacks, so that we're not going through a process twice. Because maybe when you get to the end of the rainbow here at the planning commission level, and I know you may disagree on the underlying checkbox thing, but the recommendation may end up being, at your pleasure, that you would make that motion to put those changes in, but you would add to that fill in the blank with X setbacks.
Or reducing changing the size of the building so that you're not, someone could have animals there, because that's what a lot of agriculture is in our township, but it's an amount that would not be, that would not conflict with people's homes right around that area, like what's happening with this gentleman. Something just to make the two things meld a little better.
Yeah. And that's up to you.
Well, see, I own a farm, and I grew up on a farm in Chartiers Township, a dairy farm. The farm next to our farm sold, and they divided it off, and people bought 5 or 10 or acres. Well, whenever you cleaned the barn, you got 1 million flies. Well, those people that bought those lots, whoever told them, it didn't tell them that there was a farm next to it. Well, those poor people had to suffer through all of that.
But
You were there first. And so they knew, they had knowledge. You were doing that operation and they had knowledge that you were there.
Right.
And so that's not what we're talking about. Like
But they
anyone-
all thought they were coming out there so that they could see beautiful
Sure.
farmland and
that's-
beautiful
and
And
animals.
that's how it goes.
You're right.
But,
Yep.
so when I was working on the planning board here with them, I had that in mind. And that's why some of the things that showed up in the thing were reflective of the farm side of it.
And that's important too, and I think that it's important to address as this township develops, and no one wants it to develop completely or on a fast track, but history does repeat itself and it will start to develop. And I just think, when people come here and they see what they're right beside, that's one thing. And it's like, you have the right to do it. You were here first, you're doing it. Our point is, people that are here, that have homes, that are living here, and then someone comes in and puts a lot of animals in, and they weren't doing it before, and it really does have an effect on the quality
In a
of life.
residential zone.
In a residential zone, which is, as you can see, the yellow, it's a very small part of our whole township.
Well, we don't have the utilities to have a.
Oh, right, absolutely, and I think that's great. I think it's, we're
So
preserving.
that's why we're farming.
Yeah,
We don't have
exactly.
a,
Right.
So you can either forward it to public hearing or bring it back to talk about setbacks.
what do you think, should we do about the
I,
setbacks?
I'm all for moving forward, but it's up to what do you feel, Ben?
I mean, it sounds like the setbacks and some of the different stipulations make a lot of sense. Is that something that would need to go through the regular meeting, or do we then continue to talk about these setbacks?
How would we determine it? I mean, that's the thing, they may want 500, 500
Right.
feet, but then you can't, how do you justify everybody's property is different?
Right, and the way it is right now, and you have those supplemental,
Yeah, you can't trap someone.
How come we can't?
You could
Follow
say
the
the center of the
ordinance.
parcel.
So if
The
the
building is in the center, because that way,
On a big tract, that's pretty restricted.
okay, so on a big, well, I guess that's where you could say, a tract bigger than, 20 acres, you have a setback of this. On the smaller tracts, the buildings that house the animals have to be in the center so that
Where does
if you're building a new
If you're
building-
doing from your house, where does it put that on that piece of property next to you?
A setback from my house or from the
Center.
border? Oh,
From,
from the center?
Where would
If
the
you
barn be?
put it-
where would the center be?
It would
Where
be
would it
about-
be in that, from your house, that 300 foot? Where would it be on that piece of
It's not
property?
the center.
No, it's,
It's only 10-acre piece, isn't it?
No, it's
No,
16, but it's long and narrow, like there's a lot of houses.
See, that's what I'm
around.
saying.
and right now, your setbacks for manure storage are 200 feet and are 85, and for livestock, barns that have animals in them, they have to be 85 feet, which is pretty substantial, from a street line, and 300 feet from
Occupied
any
dwelling.
adjacent landowner's dwelling, whichever is greater.
But when you're talking about, if you're not restricting the barn size and you're
Well-
gonna put a lot of chickens in there, or just any animal, you know how the wind goes and,
On a barn size, now how would you restrict that without somebody saying can you say like 1,000-foot barn? 1,000 square feet?
To me, that's a garage size. That's not a very big barn. It's not just what
in an ag zone, I don't think there should be restrictions.
Not in
But
an ag-
residential, I think there should be.
because you
And
restricted.
again, they
it-
don't, it is a balance, but, and by the same token, if somebody buys property, again, there's one thing, if you buy property in an R zone in Mount Pleasant Township, which is a rural community, in the RL zone, it's pretty similar to it's an ag zone where they allow housing, actually, as far as the chicken and the egg goes, okay? They've introduced housing into the ag zone, and that's why it's the RL zone. So it didn't prioritize residential over that. And zoning concepts, by and large, do not have kind of first come, first serve. The uses are on equal footing. Somebody that wants to use a property in that zone for residency, they're free to do that. But other folks in the future, in the past, present, and future, we don't do first come, first serve with zoning ordinances. And if somebody wants to come on here and rejuvenate farming and buy 100 acre, 40 acre, whatever tract, 10 acre plus tract in a zone where agriculture is allowed, then there's also a strong argument that that should come with all the rights that come with the right to farm.
What's the point of zoning then?
It's not unusual where again, this was not made an exclusive residential zone. They actually introduced residential
Doesn't answer the question.
into the ag zone.
Yeah.
It's a hybrid zone. And it is an agricultural community. So.
Can you read the mission statement for the RL?
Again, the specific controls are general. When you look at the mission statement, it talks about agriculture and that, but when you look at the permitted uses, it allows agriculture every bit as equally. In fact, it allows agribusiness. That actually demonstrates a legislative intent that they wanted to continue to allow farming in its fullest capacity in both of those zoning districts.
Where it didn't conflict, what it actually.
There is no where it didn't conflict.
Pardon me?
They are on equal footing. There is nothing that says asterisk where it doesn't conflict. You're allowed to have in those zones, if you want to develop residential properties, you can, but you do that knowing that you're in a zone that fully allows agribusiness and agriculture.
I know it doesn't say where it doesn't conflict, but what I'm saying is because of the restrictions, they're allowing agriculture, but they're not allowing it in the full capacity that they would allow it in the ag zone where they're not trying to have homes and residential, where it's just agriculture, where it's one farm up against the other. You can have the full Monty of whatever is permitted. So what I'm saying is when you read the mission statement of the RL zone, and yes, agriculture is permitted, but when you allow big operations of animals and things like that, that there was a recognition, in my opinion, that that's a conflict with the residential. And I go back to, if we're not going to really look at the mission statement of the zone, why do we have that? That is what our vision is for that zone.
But the vision for that zone was, and I beg your pardon, I didn't mean to cut you off. The vision for that zone was not to minimize in any manner, shape, or form agriculture or agribusiness. Agribusiness was and continues to be. So I'm not sure how you could have agribusiness without any structures.
You can.
You put restrictions. You already have restrictions on agribusinesses in the residential zone. So why are you saying you can't put these?
No, not in the RL zone. Not in the RL zone. We allow the full Monty. We allow that.
But you don't allow the buildings. You can't go to the
and
building.
that's because of
family member.
And again, the reason
That was a mistake.
the reason why that was introduced, I believe, inadvertently in 2018, as I said at the beginning, when they introduced the definitions in the accessory use chart. We have created in the 2018 ordinance what I believe to be an idiosyncrasy where we allow agribusiness and agriculture in the A zone and in the RL zone. So, but we allow agribusiness, and the idiosyncrasy is that you can have a farm, but you can't have a barn. And
maybe that was done on purpose. In my opinion, that's pretty ingenious zoning.
Because you do
again, and I get that, and I know that was the argument that your lawyer made at the zoning board. I was here for that. Again, if you look at the minutes and the discussion, the planning commission, there was no recollection in any of the public hearings or in enacting the ordinance an intentional, purposeful legislative intent to say, yeah, you can have a farm, but you can't have a barn. That's my humble opinion on that.
How about your humble opinion, 300 feet from the property line, your house?
Yeah.
My house is, that's right there, 86 feet away.
Again, that's not a farm, and that's not what we're talking about. That was, you had a lawsuit with your neighbors, and nobody. The zoning
All right,
board.
all right, hey,
We're
come
not
on,
gonna get
Wayne.
into that, but nobody ever said that that
You
property is a
ever have
farm.
an 80-year-old
It's
man
not.
beat his ass?
Please,
It's coming.
I'll take it.
Okay, we're gonna move on.
So let's just send it the way it is. And no worrying about how far away a building is or whatever.
Can't we make a recommendation that they consider that and discuss it and then hear at a bigger open forum meeting? with
They could if they wish. Yeah.
Because they're the ones that make the decisions.
But if you want to push it
We have no
forward,
power to
if you
make
want to move it
decisions.
forward now because you're satisfied with the enhanced setbacks that you already have in the ordinance, then you could just repeat the motion that you just had and move it for public hearing.
No, it's gonna be lost at a public hearing. If you at all can see that we have a point of making we're not trying to restrict anybody. We're not trying to take anyone's livelihood away, but the way it is now, it can do a lot of damage to people's lives day in, day out. I think
There's not many farms, most of the farms, there's only, 28 dairy farms left in Washington
Ain't
County?
that many.
Not even that many?
Mm-mm.
I mean, that's what I thought I read there, that there was like 28.
Yeah, when it's coming down, and all this fuel and shit's going on, it's gonna be less.
So there's not many people wanting to really farm anymore
I mean,
unless
you
you're
might
already
see
doing
the
it.
chicken farms or goat farms, something small, or beef farm.
but
Would
we're
you,
not-
let me ask you this, would you be happy with, what size barn do you think would be good for that? I mean, to make you happy?
for that,
I don't care what size barn, it's just the amount of livestock
in it,
that's
the
all.
number of animals, like it's,
I don't care
you know-
what size the building.
How can we, what's the best?
That
way to-
would be actually, to me, and again, I was thinking out loud, talking out loud. That actually is, to me, a different, it's cousin topic, but to me, that would be, it sounds to me that would be, this suggestion on your part might be that there be consideration given to perhaps eliminating agribusiness as opposed to agriculture from the zones that allow residential.
I don't think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's basic, because you talk about the intensity of
And you
farming.
can't
All we're
put
talking about
many
now is whether you can
animals
have
for
a
a
barn
barn.
on a farm.
Right, that's
You
all, yeah,
can't-
that's basically all it is, we're just trying to let people have structures,
Yeah,
have a barn.
yeah.
But I understand your point, you don't want,
That's all this is.
It's the animal, it's the
If you allow
amount.
can we change how many of our policy for how many animals per acre and all that, can we do that?
Can you
Is that
do a
easier to
small
change?
farm?
Excuse me?
Can you say it like a small farm and a large farm? So like a smaller farm.
Well,
would
we
be-
have, like I said, we have an ordinance saying how many horses you can have,
Right.
or dogs, or
That would
anything
be a
like that.
smaller farm.
Those are for stables, and there's ag regulations, and I'm not an expert on ag regulations or what constitutes intensive agriculture versus, generic agriculture. Those are more regulated by
The USDA.
agricultural
Yeah.
regulations.
Because it's really not the,
And there is also the Right to Farm Act, et
Yeah.
cetera.
but you have to be doing it for a year without any complaints before you're eligible for that right to farm act, like that, you have to.
All right, I'll change my motion. Let's postpone it till May,
Okay.
and then we'll see what we come up with.
Yeah, thank you, we really appreciate you, looking into.
You got a
it.
second?
Again, there's no urgency, it's.
Yeah, it just, something that can work for, because I think that's your whole purpose. You're trying to make it a good community for everyone, recognizing everyone's rights to live the way they want.
Maybe we can figure out the best way to do that to make
Yeah,
things better for.
Would you put that in writing and present it to us so that we can see your ideas? Anyone here who
sure, we
wants to
can
see
do
those
that, we can,
ideas.
Yeah, we have
just
to
a
take that.
suggestion, yeah, that would be, and I do understand.
And your
that there's-
reason, your
and-
ideas and your
yeah,
reason.
And that there's a difficulty with, the parcels, the shape of them has a lot to do with, it's not just the size, the number
Yeah,
of
but you
acres.
can't
it's-
put all that.
Right, and that's where, we'll come up with something
Oh.
and put it in writing.
We got a second
Who do
on
we
the motion?
submit it to?
You can second it?
Probably easiest.
Kathy seconded. Any
Probably have
questions on the
Stacy's
motion?
email. And if you went
All
forward,
those in
share
favor?
it out to
Aye.
everybody else as well, and we'll just do it. If
Motion
you have
carries.
suggestions regarding the setbacks, whether, or anything else along the lines.
Thank you, we appreciate that.
All right, data centers.
Data centers.
You done?
No, we have data centers. No,
And you've looked at, for folks that haven't been here before, they've been looking at this since October. They've probably looked at 3 different kind of drafts where we've tried to refine. And I will say that in ordinances, plagiarism is the greatest form of flattery. We've had the benefit, Nicole happens to work for a couple other communities that have already had experiences with the data centers, and there's a lot of think tanks and stuff around the state that have model ordinances and whatnot. Smith Township went through some growing pains because they had, you know, and this isn't, and a lot of times, as folks know, if you have nothing, that's the worst position you can be in. These ordinances aren't designed to say, yay, we want data centers. It's just if you don't have anything, then you can get like a Trojan horse, and it can be deemed to be a permitted use if you don't have anything. So
Can we just say no data centers?
no, you can't, because you have to. It's a use. It's a kind of a use, and if you don't provide for it, somebody could go out and buy a property in the A zone and say, hey, you got nothing. This is, and there's an argument that could be made that if you don't have anything and you don't have it covered, that you need to cover it. So it's kind of a better safe than sorry. We went through the same exercise, similar, a year or so ago with the solar, large-scale solar things. So what we've done, and again, a lot of work that came out of Nicole and Keith's office and benefited from the other communities, our neighbors that have done some of this. And we'd like to take all these things and put them in a blender and kind of try to come up with some of the best of the regulations. If you've seen in the media, even recently, Donna Road and Soster Bank, they're actually getting in the public hearing process on theirs. And actually, they have a latest draft online, and I'll tell the folks in Soster Bank, I went in because they actually did an updated draft since our last planning commission meeting. Some of the same concepts as ours, but they had some stuff that we liked, so we kind of cut and pasted some of their stuff. And all the highlighted stuff here, this is kind of a third, and we think probably a draft that's ready for a recommendation. And just walking through just as a zone, where it is going to be on a map. They definitely have determined they wish to have those be allowed only in the M zone, only in the industrial zone. Okay?
That's perfect.
Now, one could look there and say, and a lot of the industry folks in different industries, whether it was cell towers or different things in the past, or even a big Best Buy, well, you don't have enough land for that. Sometimes assembly is required. We don't have to provide every acreage for every use. If you want to go into a zone, or if you want to buy a property next to it and advocate an expansion of the zone, that's something that you can do in the future. We have a reasonably sized industrial zone. This use is an appropriate use for that zone, and that's where the planning commission has already kind of recommended as far as what zone it should be in. Then other than that, okay, what do you do with it, and what kind of things do you want to look at regulating? It also is appropriately, because these are things that are site-specific and have a lot of regulatory stuff in them, some that's above our pay grade, state level, some that's within our pay grade, so to speak. So it's recommended we make it a conditional use, and that's what folks have been doing with these ordinances. And some of the main issues are setbacks. And we're going to dovetail back to that because Nicole actually gave you some options, because one of the final things you wanted to look at is setbacks, appropriate setbacks for you. So we'll hand out in a minute. She has some maps that show you what different setbacks would create as a result. So there's that. And then there's kind of the buffering and landscaping, access and parking, and noise containment, vibration containment, lighting, and all that sort of stuff. With those sorts of things, you have to kind of be consistent with the other industrial uses, because inside a zone, you can't kind of, okay, we'll take a steel mill. A steel mill can go 70 decibels, and another, you kind of have to be, even-handed on that sort of thing. So, if you go to page 4, one of the things that we did in this one, and I think she recommended last month, and you guys wanted the most screening that you could allow in that zone, and it cross-references our general requirements. That type A, that's the more intense buffer yard that you would have to do. So we put that in there. If you go to
it does 50 feet. It's a 50-foot wide.
yeah, what is that one there under 703, Nicole?
Type A is like how they kind of have to plant the trees and everything, but we say it needs to be 50 feet.
50 feet wide.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you go to page 5, the off-street parking and loading, that's a kind of mundane topic, but basically it's the same requirements that you would have for a manufacturing use there. And then noise limits, it's the performance standards of the same sound standards that would govern if you put a steel mill in or a compressor station or anything else. In addition to that, and similar to some of the stuff you see in the oil and gas world with compressor stations and whatnot, they have to do sound studies and all that and then mitigation measures based on them, but there's also kind of an asterisk that says, if that doesn't work, you might have to, even after you go into operation, if that proves not to do the job, there's a requirement to have to maybe enhance their sound if it doesn't kind of live up to what was represented. The big topic is that you hear everywhere in this topic, out in the media, everywhere. The two topics are water and electricity.
Yeah, my water's got bugs in it. You won't do a damn thing about it.
So under power supply, what we've done, the last draft, it had a thing that said that they may use.
What's it say about cow shit coming out your spigot?
Mr. Chairman, please. That you may use public water.
You can?
We've actually, at your request, if you look at power supply, I'm sorry, I switched from electricity
300 feet
to water. On page 6, we have power supply. If you see, I have in there, unless expressly prohibited by state or federal law. And the reason why I inserted that, if you remember, there's legislation out there right now on the state level that actually would require a data center to provide its own power.
Yeah.
Okay? And actually on a federal level, there's been some conversations where I think even President Trump has been having open conversations with the industry right now voluntarily that could lead to regulation. So what I did in this draft is, and again, local government has some limitations on its power. I just stuck the phrase here that says, unless we're prohibited from doing so by state or federal law, then they shall provide an independent, reliable power generation by building their own facility. I don't know that that would be upheld in the law eventually, but right now, unless somebody tells us that's illegal, that's kind of what we're going to go with. And then if you skip,
Well, isn't there talk if they're using all that power that it's raising the consumers, the regular residential power?
Well, that goes to clause 3 here that we put in. And a lot of these have them, and even South Mains and a lot of the model ordinances, they assume that somebody's going to be plugging into a grid somewhere, okay? So in most of the model ordinances, and we have that. So we have clause 1 that says, bring your own power unless somebody tells us we're not allowed to make you do that, okay? If somebody comes and tells us we're not allowed to make you do that, then you go to section 3, and that says, to the extent that we're required under federal or state law to allow data centers to seek approval and get power from the grid, then they can apply for a data center that would rely on the grid, but they have to demonstrate and get a certification, which is what some of the legislation anticipates, that they have what's called, and I actually borrowed the phrase that they use in the state law, reliable energy supply. And they would have to show that they have, including but not limited to, a reliable energy supply including but not limited to negative impacts directly attributable to that data center on electric rates or the continued availability of reliable energy supply for other current or foreseeable uses. And in addition to that, they would have to show that they have an executed agreement with the public utility, or whoever the energy provider is, that certifies that they're able to do that. Borrowed off of one of the other ordinances also that they have, just to reduce as much, maybe it's small ball, but put some solar on a roof to run some of your stuff. It takes it down, a little bit. Going over to water on page 7, and we added wastewater.
I got that.
As well.
A lot of it.
Yeah. And at the engineer's suggestion, and we also included here,
Take care
they're
of your
not allowed to
citizens,
use.
don't you? Mouth.
They're not allowed to use well water.
Wayne, come on.
I don't know that. Again, right
And
now
if you
that's
got a
our
sick
position,
wife
and
and
we're
a
sticking
jackass
to it.
like him,
The ordinance, as we have it written right now, would not allow one to use well water. If we were required by state law, or it was found that was unlawful, then that would be stripped from the ordinance, but that's the way the ordinance is written right now, and that's our position. If they are required to or allowed to use a public water source, then just like with the electricity, they would have to go to PAWC or whoever the water provider was and have a certification that says that it has all the required quantities of water that it needs for the site. It would have to submit a certified water needs analysis confirming that. And again, they would also have to have a copy of their executed agreement commitment from the public utility or the water authority, whoever the water provider was, showing that they had that. And then by the same token, under number 7, we added wastewater disposal, that they would actually have to show that they also have the ability to and have DEP approval and local authority approvals, whoever the water provider or the wastewater provider is
$75 an hour
for that. So
Now, on that wastewater, can they put their own treatment plant in?
if they possibly could, if they could put a treatment plant in that showed that they could comply with DEP, then conceivably they would be able to do that. Under the emergency requirements, some of this we kind of just flipped around, put in more of a organized manner, but also added fire suppression. So they have to provide, it was a great suggestion from Nicole, that they actually have to pay for and provide annual training for our firefighters and first responders. They have to have each building and the access entrance equipped with a Knox box and shut-off mechanisms and alarms. They also have to have fire suppression systems in all of the rooms that meet the national standards. And they also have to have a surface road that allows major emergency equipment to access it. Page 9 is the decommissioning. Obviously, you don't decommission a building is a building. But anything that would be kind of, because there are outbuildings, out structures, and other things that are unique to that, if it was decommissioned as a data center sometime in the future, then they would have to basically decommission it. And similar to what was done with the solar ordinance, there's a bond requirement that they would have to put up a bond that would go in place right when they started operations. It would stay on file, that would, and could be has to be increased over time for inflation. That would be 125% of the decommissioning costs. So that's that. And then I guess skipping back to so that was kind of all the refinements that we did, adding the cross numbers for all the others, those kind of regulations on the buffering, and adding some enhanced language for those, the water and the energy usage. And that brings us to skipping back to page 3, which is the setbacks. And you had asked us and Nicole, actually, if you have the handout.
Oh, yeah,
that she
I
had.
handed it out to them. They should all have a copy.
We have extras, man. Anybody want to look at her handy dandy map sheet with all the trouble?
I also have extras.
So there are, and it's interesting, so some of the model ordinances, they have as little as 300, just a generic 300-foot setback, even some of the Penn Future ordinance had that. Some of the other ones had kind of hybrid setback on them. Nicole, if you want to walk through your map with them, she kind of
Yeah, so there's,
shows you what happens if you do different setbacks.
yeah, we were talking, we're like, well, what if we do like this larger setback or this setback or whatnot? So we just kind of like mapped out all the options for it. So the first one's 1,000 feet. I will say that one, then the usable area of the M1 is only 26%. That makes me a little wary that there would be some pushback if it ever came to that, like you're not allowing like enough area for it to go and be like used for a data center. The next one is if you did, it's next. If you did 1,000 feet from occupied structures and a 300-foot just period setback from the residential and ag district. So that's why you can almost like see where they're like,
Which
what's the
exhibit- is
structure
that-
and there's a circle around
Is that
it.
exhibit 2?
Yeah, that's exhibit 2. So that could also be an option. The kind of the drawback of that is it's 1,000 feet from occupied structures. That's currently occupied structures. So if someone goes and builds a house, but there's already a data center, it doesn't really help them too much. And then if we go on to exhibit 3, that's just a period 800-foot setback. Again, the usable area is 35%, so not too bad. And then exhibit 4 is just a period 500-foot setback. Usable area of the M1 is about 50%. And then the last one is 1,000, is only you can do 1,000 feet from occupied structures. And that one actually, you get into that little piece of the M1 that's like on like the northwest portion of the township. I don't think any of it's usable, but technically there's a little sliver that a data center can be put there. You could do whichever one you want. I think the ones that make the most sense are just like the straight X many hundred feet, probably the 500-foot setback, because that's significant enough. That is 500 feet from like the ag and residential districts, but not like too constrictive. And then also there are other things in this ordinance that you have to have the buffer, you have to have the screening, you have to, the facade of the building needs to look good. It can't just be this giant blank wall. So that would be my recommendation, to choose from one of those. Because if you do 1,000 foot from an occupied structure, you can, but then it gets like a little hairy of like, then the people after the data center already goes in, then they're kind of out of luck, because that doesn't help them that way.
That's the best one.
Yeah. So just a visualization of like whatever step back that you choose, what it would realistically look like.
What one are you on?
I kind of like the 800-foot.
So that is exhibit 3, and then the percent usable area of M1 is 35%. And it does look like there are quite a few pieces of land that it would still be usable on for a data center. Yeah, we can do 800 feet. Tom, do you like the 800-foot one? It's exhibit 3. Oh, 35% of the
Just looking at it.
35% of M1 would be reusable,
Mhm.
but I do see that there's quite a few pieces of land that it'd be viable
I
to
mean,
go
it
and have a
gives,
data
it
center.
gives a buffer zone for the A1 district pretty good.
Yeah, A1 and the RH.
Yeah.
And the B1 would just be like the normal, like 35 feet or,
Mhm.
you know, the whatever setback they normally need.
Then it doesn't matter. You can do it anywhere.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we use the 800-foot setback. You got a second? Motion dies.
Now, would that be principal and accessory?
That'd just be the setback
And from any of the,
from the A1 and
Like
in
this
this.
but that would
scenario,
include the
RH.
kind of outside,
One.
for want of a better word, the principal building plus whatever the facilities are that are
We
underground
have to do
outside
more
as
than
well.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, just a
That's
setback
gonna give it
from
toward where they are.
everything. So we have this,
Restriction.
So we would combine, if you look at page 3.
yeah,
where
we combine A and B
that would be
into
one
just
roll, and it
800
would
foot.
be, okay.
Because I feel like that's also the easier way to do it.
Did she second that?
What she wanted
No,
to do.
nobody did, so it might.
Well, the one draft,
I'll-
some of them
I'll-
differentiate
I'll-
between the
you said-
building
okay,
and accessory,
okay.
but if we're just talking about a setback, and really the purpose of setback is really mainly noise, sound, containment. So, yeah, and I'd be comfortable with either one, the 800 or the 500. If you look at the difference, they're not.
There's not much
They're
difference
not
between that.
appreciable.
I just think the 800 is just a little better than 500. Just
Right, and it's easier to go down than up if there's a challenge in the future.
And they could always come back for a variance or something if they wanted a little bit less.
We got a second on the motion. Any questions on the motion? Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. No? You not voting?
I'm that A1. That piece of property, that A1 piece of property,
Yeah.
that's
yours.
me.
Oh, that's you.
That's yours.
Which one?
Which one?
Motion
Oh,
carries.
yes.
This.
Okay.
Which one was this
So I
one?
don't want it too close, buddy.
She voted.
Yeah.
She didn't vote. I guess she said no.
But that's, and then I think about, there's, the houses. I know the people that have houses right up in that were already,
Yeah. But it'd be 800 feet from the property line, so that's even probably further from them where their house is.
go the other way.
There's gonna be a lot of noise with this. There's gonna be a lot of noise with this,
Yeah.
There's a,
decimal wise.
And you're
Well,
already
technically,
stinky.
we sucked the decibel ordinance into sound containment ordinance into this ordinance.
Yeah.
So they actually have to show the
They have to
same
come-
sound containment that, say, a steel company or a manufacturer, say a compressor station.
Compressor station,
They'd have to have the same sound mitigation and the buffering and whatnot. So the hope is that with those standards, and again, there's measurements, enforcement and all that,
Yeah.
that they would do that.
so it wouldn't be any louder than what's already allowed there.
But if it's done right, you don't mind. Just like I'm right across from Mark West Rail Yard.
Yeah.
The only thing bad about it are the lights. I wish we would have done something more.
That's Chartiers. You couldn't have
So,
done that.
make sure with this.
Don't count it.
Right, yeah, right.
And they may have even enhanced their game since those went in there. Because there's a lot, the more current lighting ordinances, they do a lot with down lighting
Yes.
and all that, and pollution, and you have to show you don't have light pollution leaving the property and whatnot. If you folks were happy with all the other
Yeah,
changes,
we can
you
make
could
a
also
motion
do
to-
it on the overall that would, yeah.
I'll make a motion to.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
So my understanding is the noise, it's not that it's so loud, but it's constant, right? It's like a hum.
It's like a humming noise or something
It's
like
just
that.
all the time. So if the township doesn't really want data centers, like couldn't we say they have to build like those walls like around the well site?
Yeah, it would kind of be included in like the normal noise ordinance. So like we're not, so like.
You can't just make it more restrictive for this.
Not than the other uses in that zone. And the one thing about these, the primary, it's actually in a building, so there may be some exterior accessory things that make noise that would actually have to be contained themselves, possibly within a structure, at least a three-sided structure, and possibly a building if necessary. But the major, like the data center buildings, they're buildings.
Yeah, I think what I was reading, cooling fans is a big thing.
Yeah, I don't know what it is that makes the noise, but from what I've heard, it's just a constant.
Drone.
It's just constant.
If they could make a white noise, maybe that would be. Everybody.
Okay, now what?
We gotta make a motion yet.
I thought we did.
That was just on the
That was just for
setbacks.
setbacks. I'll make a motion to move the data center ordinance to the supervisors for
For public
approval,
hearing. Yeah, public hearing.
public hearing.
I'll second.
Kathy, second. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye.
And we'll probably have that scheduled for the end of May.
Any other public comment beside Wayne? Tom, do you have anything?
No, sir. Oh, sorry.
Dave, Cindy? Okay. Make a motion for adjournment?
Seconded.
All right.
See where
All
I
in
am?
favor,
No
aye?
one complains about the sheep.
No, meeting adjourned.
That's because you built a new fence.
We made too much noise.